Welcome back, everyone, to Lesson by Lesson, A Course in Miracles. We're diving into Lesson 14 today.
Lesson 14.
God did not create a victim.
Oh, this is a good one.
Yeah, this one really kind of takes what we were talking about yesterday in Lesson 13 with forgiveness as the path to healing our perception. And it kind of expands on that a little bit.
Yeah.
And tackles this huge idea of victimhood.
Right. And that we're not victims.
Right.
Which is a hard one to swallow sometimes.
It can be.
Yeah.
It can be a hard one. But the Course offers a really interesting and unique perspective on it.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be looking at excerpts from the workbook for students as our guide today for this deep dive into Lesson 14.
Okay.
So jump right in.
Let's do it.
The big idea here is that God did not create victims.
Right.
God created us as beings of love and power.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the things that I find most fascinating about this lesson is that it challenges this belief that so many of us have.
Absolutely.
That we're somehow at the mercy of our circumstances.
Yes. And it's so ingrained in us
It really is.
that we are victims.
Right.
And it's almost like society even encourages that
Yes.
to a certain degree.
So how would you say that this lesson reframes that idea of being a victim?
Well, it puts the responsibility back on us,
Okay.
for one thing.
Okay.
You know, we're not victims of our circumstances. We actually have the power to choose how we respond to things.
Okay. So it's not necessarily denying that bad things happen,
No, not at all.
but it's more about how we choose to relate to those events.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Exactly. It's about recognizing that we have agency.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that idea of agency.
Huh.
So if we're not victims, then what is the Course saying we are?
Well, the Course reminds us that we're actually powerful creators and we are connected to a divine source.
Okay.
So we're not these separate, helpless beings that we sometimes perceive ourselves to be.
You mentioned perception there, and I think that's a really important point because the workbook talks about this idea of victimhood as a misperception.
Yes.
So can you break that down a little bit more for me? What does that mean? Like, what is misperception in this context?
Sure. So, you know, sometimes we see the world through a distorted lens.
Okay.
We may perceive ourselves as being powerless and at the mercy of external forces or fate.
Oh, so it's kind of like those optical illusions where you look at something and you think it's one thing, but then
Exactly.
you realize it's something else entirely.
Exactly. It's like our perception can be flawed.
Right.
And the Course invites us to question those perceptions and to choose a different lens to look through.
And I think that's a really helpful analogy because it shows that it's not necessarily about denying reality or pretending that bad things don't happen, but it's about choosing to see things from a different perspective.
Right.
And that perspective being one of empowerment
Right.
and connection
Yeah, exactly.
to that divine source.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does this idea of misperception actually play out in our daily lives? Like, do you have any examples that come to mind?
Well, the workbook gives a couple of really good examples.
Okay.
One of them has to do with relationships. And let's say someone does something that hurts you.
Okay.
Instead of instantly going into victim mode
Right.
and feeling sorry for yourself, the Course encourages you to kind of take a step back and to think about it a little differently, to ask yourself some questions.
Oh, okay. So it's not about ignoring our feelings.
No, not at all.
But it's more about how we respond to them.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what kind of questions would you ask yourself in a situation like that?
Well, you could ask yourself, how did I contribute to this situation?
Okay.
Or what can I learn from this experience?
I see. So instead of blaming the other person, you're looking for what you can learn and how you can grow from the experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's about taking responsibility for your own feelings and your own reactions,
Okay.
which can be hard,
Yeah. That can be really challenging.
but it's so empowering when you do it.
I can imagine. So that's a great example from the realm of personal relationships. Does the workbook offer any other examples maybe from other areas of life where this might come up?
Yeah, absolutely. There's another one that deals with work.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people can relate to this one.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's say you're feeling overwhelmed at work. You have way too much on your plate. You're feeling stressed out.
Yeah.
Instead of just saying, oh, I'm a victim of this workload,
Right.
you know, I have no control over this.
That's not my fault.
The Course suggests that you try to reframe it
Okay.
and think about, okay, what is within my control here? What can I do to make this situation better?
I like that.
Yeah,
So it's about focusing on the things that you can actually change and taking action.
exactly.
And it sounds like this lesson really emphasizes taking responsibility for ourselves
Yeah,
and our experiences,
absolutely.
which I think can be a really hard thing to do sometimes.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a process. It's a journey. It
Yeah.
doesn't happen overnight.
And speaking of taking action, does the workbook offer any practical tools that we can use to kind of help us shift out of this victim mentality?
It does.
Okay.
One of the things it suggests is using affirmations.
Okay, affirmations. So those are positive statements that you repeat to yourself, like, I am not a victim.
Exactly.
I am powerful.
Yeah.
I am connected.
Yeah. I love those. I use those all the time.
They can be so helpful. And the workbook also mentions journaling as another tool.
Yes.
Journaling is a great way to uncover those hidden beliefs
Okay.
that might be contributing to a victim mentality.
Right.
It's like a safe space to explore your thoughts and your feelings without judgment.
Oh, that's interesting. So with journaling, would the idea be to kind of like write about situations where you felt like a victim and then
Yeah.
maybe try to challenge those thoughts?
Exactly. Yeah, and
Okay.
try to come up with a different perspective.
Okay.
Ask yourself, what's another way of looking at this? Yeah, and I think all of this really leads up to that reflection question that the workbook poses,
Yes.
which is, in what areas of your life
Mm.
do you still see yourself as a victim? And how can you start shifting that perception towards one of empowerment and responsibility?
That's a good one.
It is. And it might be helpful to just take a moment now and really reflect on that question for yourself.
Yeah.
What comes up for you when you think about that?
Mm.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive into Lesson 14.
It's been my pleasure. And it's really got me thinking, if we really believe that we are not victims, how might that change the way that we approach challenges in our lives? Just something to ponder.
That's such a great point. This is definitely something for us all to think about. And thank you for all of these incredible insights, as always.
Of course.
To our listeners, be sure to like, share, subscribe, and we'll be back tomorrow for Lesson 15.
See you then.